Say as of just a few minutes ago, there's still no indication that who may have set the bombs. Clearly, one of the things I started watching television because
Yeah.
video is kind of interesting. Um, one of the things I noticed is because it's the marathon, there's a lot of doctors at the finish line.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
and they're marked and they move right in and we're really
There's a lot who run it as well.
yes, and you could
So,
tell
yeah,
the ones that were taking charge. There was an immediacy to take charge. So,
yeah. I've been at that marathon, and
so
it
have
is
I.
quite, yeah, it is quite impressive. And certainly the combination of having that many people in one place, and it's also tax day, and we think of Boston as the tea home, sort of home of the Tea Party, that kind of thing. That you never know what's going on there.
Right. And you and I talked, there's 27,000 runners approximately, and that time was, as you mentioned, the bubble, the perfect time
It
for
is.
the vast majority of runners to be crossing the line.
I think they're
Three
fortunate.
and a half to 4 hours probably.
Seems fortunate that with two bombs that more weren't killed, and I guess that they were able to defuse or detonate a bomb at a hotel.
One bomb, right.
And there was apparently another one found. The idea that there had been a bomb at an explosion at the JFK library, still, Huffington Post is still reporting that's the case, but apparently that was a mechanical fire. A lot
Yeah,
of
that's
places
what I
are.
last read. The other thing they did was interesting, which it must have been probably the worst thing going on in Boston is all cell phone was shut off.
Right, because you can use those cell phones as an activator, and if there were bombs all over the city, they didn't want to make that easy. So
But
that
people
certainly
trying to get,
frustrates people
yeah,
wanting
trying to
them.
get in and out, let people know they're okay, couldn't happen.
Well, you can tell we're nervous because they shut down Logan Airport. They stopped even the pedestrian traffic in front of the White House. So there were obviously serious concerns that this might be part of something larger.
Well, it's also one of the maybe premier event. It certainly is for running, but it's probably one of the top
Yeah,
five premier events in Super Bowl and things like that. Rose
very
Bowl.
international too. Yeah. So that's not the way that you would hope the spring season would start off here. That's not good news these days. We seem to have blown by our tensions with North Korea. They had their big celebration today. I don't know that anybody still found out where Kim Jong-un is. He seems to have disappeared. Maybe he got crossed with the wrong people and we won't see him for a while. But today we did, before the tragedy in Boston, we did see the stock market and gold melt down. First time in history that both went down together in tandem, 2% apiece. I mean that,
Must
well,
be the
10%.
Bitcoin's doing it, right?
Bitcoin's doing, I guess it's ruined everything. Yeah, that in Cyprus, I guess. Oh God, it's hard to
How much
keep
did
up
the
now.
stock market finally fall?
260,
That's pretty good.
two
Pretty good
percent.
bunch. Yeah, 2%.
Gold went down more than that, over 10%. So I mean, life's getting exciting out there in these various areas. Hmm.
Meantime, I had two frogs at my pond.
That's good news. Yeah, yeah. Only two, or could you hear them, or
I saw
peepers,
them.
or oh, you saw them.
Saw them. I don't want more than
Oh,
two.
I see. Well, if you've got two, you could well have more.
One's pretty small.
The other big news in locally is we will be having our Lansing Marathon this Sunday. I haven't heard much about it in advance. I'm hoping to find out more about the details. But I've seen the flashing lights up there on Mount Hope warning people that on Sunday to be careful. That's part of the route. So when you're driving around on Sunday, you might want to plan a little extra time for certain crossroads because the marathon will be going around town one way or the other. I don't know if they're using the same route as last year.
Well, last year they ran out by your house.
Yeah, I'm hoping they do again so I can go by. It makes it handy to go out and take pictures when all I got to do is go about it, a half mile away.
Well, when you run 26.2 miles, you have to use a lot of space.
Yes, you do.
So,
Yes,
and it's
yes.
not, it's an out and kind of an out and back
Yeah,
some ways.
yeah. They had to redo after the first course. The first course
Yeah.
wasn't quite right. I know from the old days helping to run and put on those kinds of events how many times you have to wheel those little suckers
Now
together.
tell people what event that you helped put on out at Lake Lansing.
It was the duckathon, yes, with all the duck hats. Yes, that was fun. Although it was nervous making for anybody involved. I mean, putting on those events does make you. I really feel for the race directors in Boston who probably did their level best today, but had it all come to naught. I mean, you really do try to keep everybody safe first. That's the primary rule in those events. Speaking of dangerous things, Philip Kerr, one of my
Oh,
favorite authors, who
I didn't know you liked him.
he wrote the book The Investigation, which is maybe one of the most chilling books in that genre that I've ever read. I think it transcends the genre. But now you're saying he does Nazi noir.
He does Nazi noir. He's done 8 books in that, featuring a detective called Bernie Gunther, who's a cop during Nazi Germany. who has to investigate murders, and the murders are done by someone, an officer. So, and an officer that's highly placed. So at the time he's doing the investigation, he always has to worry, if he solves the crime, will he live?
Oh.
But Philip Kerr is a scholar of Nazi Germany.
Mm.
He's also a children's author.
Interesting, isn't
And
it?
I
Yeah.
posted, for people who want to know more about it, he sent me, I think I asked him about 6, 7 questions, and he sent those to me by email. So I posted those on Lansing Online News. You'll get a good insight into who he is. He's a very clever writer.
Well, the investigation had a unique conceit, which was that in order to remain humane, societies had adopted putting people into medically induced comas for the rest of their life rather than capital punishment. And in reality, it was far less humane, probably, than killing people. But it was a very interesting, very chilling book. I mean, he
His
really
books
does
are
have a
all
dark
chilling.
side.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
his books all have a dark side. They make you consider. Okay, here I am investigating a single murder in Nazi Germany
yeah,
when they're exterminating.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, he brings that up
Of
constantly.
course,
I
yeah,
mean,
he
he can't
would.
help it.
It's his. The other book is called A Philosophical Investigation. That's what it's called.
The other thing he does in the book, which a lot of people really don't know this, is he gets into uh, the military underground that was trying to assassinate
Oh,
Hitler.
really?
He brings that up pretty typically,
Mm,
so people know uh,
that serious plot.
there were serious plots, but none of them worked. They were really klutzy. You know
Although, I
what?
mean, they even blew up the bomb in the room with him and didn't get in.
I know it, and they were willing to take their lives,
Right.
and they still couldn't make it
But it was a
happen.
heavy oak desk that
Heavy oak
shielded him.
desk. Yeah, they
So,
didn't. Yeah, that was the one.
yeah.
So there were several, attacks on Hitler that just didn't happen. It just didn't work.
Speaking of that kind of criminal violence, I did spend the day on Saturday going down to the Capitol at 11 in the morning when Moms Demand Action Against Guns was down there. And they had more people than the pro-gun people who were there, but they had the pro-gun people on the sidewalk in front of the Capitol, and then the gun control people, the gun safety people on the Capitol steps. And so it was kind of interesting because they had the peace team in between sort of running around. And because I didn't have my press credentials clearly visible, the police kept trying to get me out of there so I wouldn't chat with the gun folk who were big pro-gun people because they were getting too agitated. Um,
Were you agitating him,
of
or?
course.
Oh, okay. That's what I
Of
thought
course.
that, but I had to make it clear.
I'm thinking of bringing a cattle prod one day to agitate them a little more, but I always like to get them going, you know.
It doesn't take much.
No, 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 no. I mean, the only thing I have to keep reminding myself is they really are armed, you know. I mean, they do come with every weapon available. I remember as this woman walked by and I said, "Oh, you must be the token woman." And ooh, I thought, probably not smart. Yes. And I was asking them why no African Americans. I mean, Marissa had been talking to her, and she was saying, you know, it was unfortunate that the African American community wasn't represented. Well, boy, they scurried and got 2 guys for me on the gun side. I mean, it was funny. I don't know that either side is going to. I think this whole thing is going to go nowhere.
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that it's a stalemate. Nothing's happening.
There was a devastating.
Except I think the pro guns have won some battles.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
if nothing happens,
yeah,
they win.
Yeah, they win.
And there was a devastating critique of it on Saturday Night Live where they had the 2 senators, and they were both basically saying that even if the background checks get through, the holes in it are so wide that it's really nothing. So it's kind of sad that we went through all of that and a lot of wrenching problems. Maybe there'll be enough to salvage getting something through, but I don't think so.
What do you think about mental health legislation, especially after what happened today?
I don't think it'll go anywhere. I mean, they'll throw a little money at it, but I don't think we're going to see any massive changes. I spent Saturday night at the Black Poets Society at Michigan State University, and that was wonderful. They do their poetry slam every year, and this was their annual date. A young woman from Cleveland named Controversy won. She was spectacular. She talked about, I was unaware that she was talking about her peers down at Southern Missouri State and how many of them were trying to lose weight by smoking meth, which is quite
and their
discouraging.
Teeth, and maybe their teeth.
Well, and what's sad about it is that I had always sort of been happy that the African American community hadn't bought into this toothpick skinny model the Barbie look, and I'm afraid that, that it's so pervasive now that that community is starting to suffer some of the body image problems that other groups have.
It's hard to escape the power of the media.
We're joined by Emily Devendorf, and we're joined by Roman Collins. Emily has been named, give us your new title.
Managing Director of Equality Michigan.
Yes. And
Congratulations.
It's
Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful. She's going to talk to us tonight about some of the new things that are in her, there's that dreadful word they're using now, wheelhouse. Everybody, and see, ooh, God, I'm going to try really hard not to use that.
It sounds better than in her power. I think that scares people.
Really? I like power.
I don't mind it either, but I think that it makes me scarier. Maybe that's not a bad
I think that's a good thing. I thought the job came with a whip and a chair.
It comes with at least a gavel that does nothing. So.
And Roman, we got to get the news out on Roman. Roman is headed out to Eureka, California. And what will you be doing out there, Roman?
I will be interning at the National Move to Amend office, helping them with all sorts of national campaigns to end corporate personhood and getting money out of politics.
Oh, that'll be great. Roman has since earned his GED, turned 17. He's well on his way to, now he's just going to be a boring adult like the rest of us.
Never.
You're definitely different than when we met you first. So.
Major milestones. Major milestones.
Deals.
I'm very excited.
That's great. That's going to be wonderful. And so you'll be living out there in Eureka, going every day to the Move to Amend office, causing trouble nationwide instead of just locally.
Exactly.
Wow.
And you get to do it from a city named Eureka. I mean, it's pretty special.
Try to say that without an exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to miss you around here, Roman, because we were hoping that you would continue to agitate for change around here. But I suspect you'll be back periodically, in one way or another, maybe permanently, but maybe just to sort of, we're now the flyover state. Bill was reminding me, the reason we're a flyover state is you can't get here.
You can get to Detroit easily, but it's hard to get to Lansing by a plane.
It's very
And
hard.
it's expensive.
Yeah, and the problem is when you try to hold a conference and bring people in, the complicated travel arrangements do kind of work against you, so it is always difficult. But Emily, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what are you going to be doing in your new job, and what are the priorities for the organization this year?
Well, I moved to this position from the role of policy director, so I was the state's lobbyist for any issues related to the LGBT and HIV positive status, and I'm holding on to that, which is which is not unusual for a statewide director of an LGBT nonprofit. So I'll be doing the lobbying still, and I'll still be directing a lot of the grassroots education around the state, but I also will be trying my best to coordinate the movement as a whole and to make sure that we are running as the well-oiled machine that we need to be at this point in history when momentum and citizens' views are on our side, and yet Michigan is still way behind.
Yeah, that is a real tragedy here. I mean, we are seeing this national momentum, and there is a big fear, I think, in the community that once and if we soon achieve same-sex marriage, a lot of people are going to think that solves everything.
And it absolutely does not.
I know.
And I've talked to the executive directors in the states that have marriage, Iowa, for instance.
Yeah.
And regardless of having marriage, they're still having to go back and at the very least fight in the courts and the legislature, because you still have to have credibility and in your relationship status when it comes to birth certificates and death certificates and property. And in Michigan, as you know, we can still be fired for being gay or just perceived to be gay or how we express our gender, and there's a lot that is tied into laws that would need to be reversed. Marriage equality would certainly help in a number of ways. There are 1,138 rights just tied to marriage through federal laws. That's not even counting state laws. So it would be a wonderful victory, and we're certainly not going to send it back if it happens. We will celebrate it, but it will be a challenge to make sure that citizens know they have to still be engaged.
Will same-sex marriage automatically deal with the issue of adoption?
To a certain extent. And in Michigan, we don't have a law that makes second parent adoption illegal or legal. So it may provide some clarity to have relationship recognition, but again, we won't know that, just as other states, until we get to the point of trying to adopt what kinds of obstacles will be put in place. We still have the animosity of our leaders in Michigan to continue to create barriers.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Roman Collins of Move to Amend and with Emily Devendorf of Equality Michigan. Bill?
Well, one of the things I was thinking, if that does go forward, one of the tactics has then been to nibble away, like they've done with medical marijuana or abortion rights. I mean, that seems to be every state does that pretty successfully. Michigan does it better than most. So you'll have to face that.
And we should anticipate that if our own DOMA law gets struck down, in all likelihood, we aren't going to have marriage right away. In all likelihood, if we make any progress, it will be the striking down of our own DOMA law, or our constitutional amendment. So that means we would still have to write into our law the right for marriage equality and relationship recognition. So there's still work to do on that level, but also we should expect to have to defend any progress that we make because, of course, what they're finding in other states is you can't make progress without a whole lot of money being thrown into making you backtrack from all over the country. Our opposition is very well funded and very intent on making sure that this doesn't happen.
Go ahead. Oh, were there any corporations in Michigan that stand out that are in favor?
You know, all of the auto companies are very much pro-equality, and actually more than half of all Fortune 500 companies have their own non-discrimination policies, offer domestic partner benefits, and a great number of them have signed on to an amicus brief in the Supreme Court cases, offering their support and saying that this is good for economic development and also for the stability of their employees. So as we've seen in the last couple of years, corporations are already on the right side. Unfortunately, they're shouldering the burden, and they have to make up for lack of rights.
What about K-12 and university educational institutions? Have they been helpful to your community?
I would say the universities certainly have. The K through 12 education system is very much under the power and the whim of our legislative leadership. Whereas the universities are often granted autonomy because of their own constitutional autonomy in Michigan. And also they are seen as very large employers that nobody wants to piss off. Whereas I don't know that we can say that we have the same value for education and our teachers and our students in Michigan that we should, and they don't carry the weight.
I'm thinking the teachers' unions could have been instrumental and helpful in that as well, but the teachers' unions are now so beleaguered that I'm not sure that they have the...
It'd be another battle for them.
Yeah, I'm not sure they can take on much more than they're already battling. Yeah.
And I would appreciate their help, and certainly I wouldn't say that they shouldn't weigh in because they have so much work. I understand that they are under attack as well, but it is very much my philosophy that the injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that's why Equality Michigan will go to bat for unions and we go to bat for women. And I don't expect support in return, and yet I think that it is right that we are there for each other in these times.
That little quote about injustice, I think, didn't that come from the MLK letter from Birmingham jail?
Yes, it did.
It did.
Was that a segue into it?
How did you know? I'm doing a special
do.
segment on that in my ethics class lecture tomorrow with I have 260 journalism students in the morning, and I'm going to be reading portions of the letter. It'll be the 50th anniversary, and I have found some fascinating video clips that include Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and showing the two sides of their various philosophies. And I think it should be a really interesting discussion. But that is his quote. Give it to us again. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I specialized in the Black Power movement in college. So I came up studying a different philosophy, but I also ran race relations organizations. And it took a while for me to learn enough about Martin Luther King to see the great relevance in his message, and now that I'm doing social justice organizing, now that I'm trying to really get people to collaborate and to try to look at it in a holistic way, progress. I very much value that particular quote, and also there's another quote that I try to share whenever I'm speaking to large groups of people, and that's in the end we'll remember not the words of our enemies but the silence of our friends. And I really think that that's what it comes down to with coalition building.
It's the bystander phenomenon.
Absolutely.
You can't expect the victim to push back against the bully, but you can expect others to intervene.
Right, and that's when we see a difference.
And it's interesting because as I went over that material, and let's face it, that letter was 50 years ago, 1963. I was a year out of high school. I'll be the same age roughly as the students, the freshmen that I'll be talking to tomorrow morning. And I was thinking that at the time, I was very much in the Malcolm X camp and thought that Malcolm's time had come and gone. But when you think of the power of nonviolence and I was reading a quote from John Lennon the other day who had said, that the minute that you The minute you get into the temptation to lash back, you've lost, because
Yeah.
the other side can just demonize you.
And we're stronger. We're stronger together. Actually, this last Saturday, I went to do a political mobilization training for KIC, which is Detroit's African American LGBT organization, and we were talking about how I had specialized in the Black Power movement, and I was a huge fan of Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. And one day at MSU, Bobby Seale came to MSU, and I very excitedly took my book that seized the time that he had written, and I brought it up to him, and I said, I understand this. I see why separatism had power, and I love the idea of the community empowering themselves, and then coming back when they feel like their leadership is respected. And he stopped me mid sentence basically and said, this is something we do all together now. This is a people's movement.
Ah.
And he had acknowledged that it had changed now.
Yeah.
And it was necessary that we work together.
Yeah. Now, the separatist idea really had its appeal for a while, but I can understand.
Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to Africa. No, it's an interesting tradition to look back on. When you think about community organizing, that's what both of you do, Roman and Emily, and the challenge is getting people to show up. I mean, I saw that at the Moms Demand Action Against Guns. It's not that people don't care. I think they care. But I think there's a sort of passivity nowadays, unfortunately, where it's easy to sign the online petition or retweet something that somebody else says, but getting your butt down to the Capitol is a whole different story, and that's hard to do, and it's hard to get people out, especially when the weather's so nasty.
And not even for demonstrations, but you can be engaged by writing letters and making calls and doing letters to the editor. The point is to make sure that the legislators know that you didn't just put them into office or not put them into office, that you also hold them accountable to your interests the entire time that you're there, and that you can take them out. They should feel accountable to you, and we do a poor job of that.
Yeah, it's very, very tough. I heard Chris Hayes. I'm very fond of his. Loved his show up on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings on MSNBC. The only thing that would drag me out of bed that early on
Very
the
early.
weekend. Yes, and then now he has his nightly show. But he was talking. He'd been a community organizer himself, and he said, he talks about how difficult it is to get people to move. I think the biggest tragedy that will come out of the failure at the federal level to pass gun legislation is that who could have more standing than the Newtown families? And who could have a more poignant story to tell? And who has devoted literally their lives now to this, along with Gabby Giffords? And if they don't get anything out of that, who could have more standing? It just seems to me that that's a very poor sign when you've got an issue that's 90-10, that democracy fails to move.
The problem is that corporations do. They have more standing in Congress than, any. And issue by issue, it doesn't matter. Every time it seems that, for example, with the NRA, they get funding from the gun manufacturers by a percentage of how much guns they sell. And so automatically, the more guns the gun manufacturers sell, the more the NRA makes. So they have an incentive of preventing people or legislation that, for example, would just say criminals can't have guns. Because at some point, guns go from legal to illegal. And it's called straw purchasing. And the NRA doesn't want that to stop because they sell more guns. The gun manufacturers do.
It is shocking that their membership continues to support them, and in fact their ranks swelled after the Newtown incident when they went on the offensive. I guess what really bothers me is the thought that they did have their representatives in the room as this new compromise was hammered out related to gun registration, which has holes so big in it that it's almost completely meaningless again. All you have to do is leave the gun show and step out into the parking lot, and all of a sudden you're friends and you don't have to do a background check. And that's exactly the problem that we've had in the past. That's exactly what this law would allow. It just seems to me shocking that, it's an indictment of democracy as it's working in the United States now. Move to Amend plays an important role in trying to turn that around. What's on their agenda for this year? What do they hope to achieve this year?
Well, of course, we want to get 500,000 signatures as one of our top priorities, and you can go to movetoamend.org to sign up and get involved on the grassroots level. Really, what it's going to take is people power over corporate power. And another thing that we're trying to do is the Stampede to Amend campaign, and that is stamping U.S. currency, saying, corporations are not people. Money is not speech. On, U.S. dollars, you will start to see around the country saying, not to be used for bribing politicians.
Well, then what are we supposed to use to bribe?
Bitcoins. It's Bitcoins. I'm telling you.
Bitcoin, yeah, that'd be good. Well, you can use gold. So
Gold.
It's going to be nice and cheap. Emily, what is the reaction when you go down and talk to legislators at the Capitol? Do you receive a warm reception from both sides of the aisle?
I actually do behind closed doors.
Okay.
I would say there are plenty of witnesses to me being interrogated very passionately in a committee hearing. They're practically bouncing up and down and half jumping over their desks. But behind closed doors, almost universally, the reaction is, I understand, I'm on your side. There's a very strong value for fundamental fairness. Everybody knows somebody who's in the LGBT community, but I also unfortunately hear I just can't be the first one.
Right.
So really what it's going to take is just somebody that has the spine, and yes, I am saying that plenty don't, and they would have a chorus of support from their own caucus. And perhaps right now that we're seeing that reaction from Dave Agema and his interesting version of leadership in the Republican Party, we'll hopefully be seeing Republicans want to distinguish themselves from that Republican tradition.
Who do you think will be the hero? Who's going to be JFK's profiles and courage in this one, sort of?
I think we'll see somebody soon. We
Could
have
be like
some
the
productive
NFL, somebody's going to finally
talks.
step forward?
I hope so, and I hope to just have it be a state legislator. It doesn't have to be somebody that's rich and famous or somebody who has influence right now. It really just has to be somebody with the R next to their name for the rest of the party to follow. Because let's face it, their base is about yay big, and it's not growing, and it's about time they change their tune.
Give our listeners brief education. Dave Agema is now with the RNCC, the Republican National Coordinating Committee, and he's been making himself famous there. I don't know who put him on that assignment, but I think
he believes God did.
Oh, well, that's probably true.
Okay,
That's probably
yeah.
true. And I'm
Tablets.
give us a bit of a history of the pronouncements that he's been making in the last few weeks.
Yes, well, he has a long tradition of these types of announcements. He was in the legislature, and he was term limited in the House, and then appointed to this leadership position in the Republican Party. And he also is a big fan of social media, and unfortunately does not think so much about what kind of effect that will take, which we love, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, so he's been posting basically very terrible research by somebody that I believe, I don't remember what kind of medicine. I think he's a chiropractor, something like that. But he references a website that also has roots in white supremacy and other kinds of bigotry, and he references studies that are many decades old, and essentially says that the gay community spreads disease and has a dirty lifestyle, and also I think at one point he said we were responsible for half the murders in New York City.
In urban areas.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. I mean,
They don't clean the closets.
You know, we're really only about 3% to 11% of the population,
Wow.
unless you count the bisexual
That's really
community.
effective.
Somebody's
Yes.
paying him to do
Well,
this.
we do know that the murderers in our society are usually part of that violent 2% that we don't know what to do with. But I didn't realize it was so heavily part of the LGBT. No way.
I would have to say the numbers point to straight people, but I'm
Yeah.
not blaming
And somehow
anybody.
they're not held accountable for that
No.
in the same way, are they?
No. Luckily, we have had a strong response from young Republicans in
Yes.
Michigan, saying that this is not representative of their views and their values in the Republican Party. Unfortunately, leadership in the Republican Party in Michigan has chosen to instead just step away from the issue and not take a very strong stand, or not take a stand at all. in
I
many
actually
cases.
thought we were kind of rid of Dave Agema when he was term limited out, because I had gone down and videoed when he held that session downtown across from the Capitol where the Tea Party members came in and talked about Sharia law all day long, and the paranoia was so thick it was amazing, because they really are. They were absolutely persuaded that the Obama administration is just about to hand them over and have Muslim Islamic law, the law of the land, Sharia law. And I mean, it's very bizarre. So. But once he was term limited out, I thought we wouldn't hear from him again. But he seems. Why would they give him such a prominent position in the RNCC at a time?
And a computer.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it could be.
I questioned
or
that
at
at
least
the
a cell
time.
phone.
Level.
Yeah, I remember when they appointed him to that, and the press started calling that day, and I said, "What? That's fine, because he's going to keep talking, and you're going to regret that." And of course he did. And it's funny that you bring up Sharia law, because when I was offering testimony in committee on discrimination in counseling, they brought up Sharia law as part of their interrogation of me. Yeah, they wanted to make sure that I wasn't trying to promote that, not even realizing that what they were doing was trying to preserve a certain religious stance in law themselves. We don't look at that in that big a picture.
I mean, what they're really, I mean, they're closer to Sharia law than they might think with their own fundamentalist beliefs. You would think they'd sort of say, hey, we should join forces with that group because we kind of agree with that.
It's funny that
we need
people
to
don't
buy
recognize
a
that.
dictionary.
Though.
Yeah.
It's
just don't.
very strange. Well, I must admit that I don't envy you that part of the job, but you must want to clone yourself now because you're not getting rid of anything then from what you're telling me.
I think my job is basically to clone myself.
I
I think
see.
it's a bring people to the work and teach people how to advocate for themselves and then to make that demand of their leaders, and I'm happy with that. And hopefully many of them do it better than I ever could. I think collectively we do.
This
More
is
people have to speak up,
Mhm.
don't they? I mean,
This
that's
is
the point.
LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Roman Collins, a Move to Amend, who is on his way, going to be winging his way literally to California soon, and Emily Devendorf of Equality Michigan. And Roman, can I ask you what's going to happen to Move to Amend now that you leave? In whose tender hands are you going to leave the leadership? What do you hope will happen at the state level?
Well, the Lansing affiliate has been a little bit less active, as I had hoped it would be in the later months. But I do think that somebody within the community could definitely step up, and we would definitely foster them in doing so. And there's still going to be a lot of organizing to do on the local level, even though the city council has already endorsed the movement.
That was a huge success of yours, being able to get that through the Lansing City Council. And where else did you get it passed? At the
Ingham
level?
County Board of Commissioners.
Yeah, that was quite amazing. So they're both on record as favoring ending corporate personhood.
Well, I mean, the city council said that in the context of campaign finance, corporations are not people, money is not speech, so they are a little interesting on the other legal aspects, which can tie into things like LGBT issues. If you were to say have an employer claim religious liberty and then say they can not hire people based on sexual orientation or not provide them birth control as they're arguing or they were arguing in the courts recently. But the Ingham County Board of Commissioners had a completely good resolution as far as I'm concerned.
They went full bore.
Right, and that is that corporations in any context of the law should not be people. They should have privileges instead of rights, so that we, the people, can decide how they operate under our laws.
Maybe we could put them in that nice medically induced coma that Philip Kerr was talking about in the book.
If I was a corporation, I don't think I'd want to be a person.
Yeah, well, that's true.
You lose a lot of rights.
Or at least the 99% of us have.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they're trying to take others away.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting because in the Constitution there's outlined specifically the reason that the Constitution has a negative Bill of Rights, and it says that the government can't do things is because government is a legal entity, and if government had rights, it would be an oppressive legal entity.
Yeah.
And so when corporations stepped over the line into personhood, that's when corporations have started to basically oppress human rights around the nation.
We're really looking at right now a critical moment, I think, in our history when we're trying to pass things like improving the minimum wage, and there's so much progressive legislation in the hopper that the president would like to get through. I'm unhappy with his recent pronouncement about chained CPI. I think that's a disaster. Those of us who are already collecting Social Security because we're old don't like the idea that within a year, I mean, this would be an immediate impact. I'd lose $1,000 immediately the first year if something like that goes through. And that's really a broken promise as far as I'm concerned. So it's an unsettling era when even you wonder even how good your friends are when your friends are turning on you.
Well, the other thing is next year is the anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, but it's the war on poverty,
Yeah.
the whole Great Society. So it's going to be interesting in reflection to see where we're at today, because not much of that's left.
We don't seem to be very reflective anymore, though. We don't look back at some of our roots and really talk about what's happening in our culture. What do you see in the hopper for the Michigan legislature this year? What are the bills that you have to worry about that may be emanating? It's not just moving forward, but it's preventing us from moving any further backward.
Right, exactly. As you said, I don't think that we look at the past. We also don't look at the future. We look at now because we're reactionary and we do things in response to what we're scared of. So I really expect because we are at that point in history where we're about to tip over towards the right things happening, at least for the LGBT community. We very much expect a lot of retaliation. We are a victim services organization as well, and violent crime is going up for this. We see a lot of people coming in because they're victims of violent crime. It's peaking right now as things
right?
get better. So any legislation that is against us, I fully expect to likely have the phrase unless related to a strong belief, religious belief or moral conviction. It's an excuse that we're throwing into almost everything right now.
Yes.
I do expect to see some forward movement, and that might come back and bite me. But I'm seeing a lot of really productive discussion around employment rights and housing rights and the kinds of things we've been fighting for a long time. I think, sadly, that may be related to the fact that looks a lot less scary than marriage equality to some of these very conservative extremists. But they are starting to want to show that they are rational and that they don't believe in discrimination. So while we don't use the word discrimination very often, we talk about fairness, they are starting to throw the word discrimination into their responses to things like marriage equality, because they're using it as an explanation for well, I'm not going to be in favor of this, but I'm not all bad. I don't believe in discrimination against anybody.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm really concerned about this idea that somehow if you have a strong moral belief or a religious objection that you should be relieved of having to follow the law. I mean, that's a strange exception. It says, if I really don't want to, because I really, really believe it, then I guess I don't have to follow the law.
And it's written into laws in order to, clearly in order to discriminate against certain people, and because we do believe very much, the extremists in Michigan, that this is a Christian government. But when you write laws that way, it allows discrimination against any religion based on any reason.
Or no religion.
Right. So they're really opening it up so that somebody could discriminate against themselves and their values. So not very, very big thinking, not long term at all.
It's an interesting time to live in, and we're coming up on the anniversary of the death of JFK.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be avoided.
The death of JFK, which anniversary are you talking? The 50th. Yes,
right?
Yeah.
It's the 50th anniversary.
Right. No, we've every year I am reminded of it. I mean, it's always been a jolt in my life. It was the one touchstone, I think, of our baby boomer generation. That's the one thing we all shared in common. It was the first time I realized the age gap between me and my husband was when I said to him, "So where were you when JFK was killed?" And he said, "Toilet training." And I thought, because it was he was born in '61, so for him it was was not a contemporary issue. That's the one time that everybody does know where they were
Sure.
at the time. Where were you?
Oh, in school.
Yeah, and where were you? What happened when you
They
heard
sent us home, which was odd, which wouldn't happen today probably.
I see.
They probably had some kind of counseling or something. Everybody just was sent home. I went to a Catholic school, so it was even more, in a way, more traumatic.
Oh, I'll bet.
And we just got sent home. That's it.
That's it.
Nothing went on.
No,
And then
no
people
discussion?
just nothing.
See, that was the era when a tragedy like that occurred, we really lacked the tools to deal with it on any
Absolutely.
kind of emotional level. I mean, we now see if there's a major trauma that grief counselors go into schools and that sort of thing. We really were silent.
Oh, absolutely. The year before, I think it was 8 of our nuns got killed in an auto accident
Oh.
and sent home. That kind of thing. No, there was never any discussion. Never.
Just to give people an indicator of how our media environment has changed, I remember the night that JFK was killed. It was about 1:10 in the morning. We had already seen that we had learned that Officer J.D. Tippit had been killed, and we knew that Lee Harvey Oswald had been picked up. We'd seen him in the hallway. Dan Rather had come out and was giving us the updates from Houston. That was what made his career. That's when we got to know Dan Rather. And about 1:15 in the morning, that was it. They went off the air till the morning. Too bad. I mean, it could mean that, that the Russians had killed him and we were all going to be dead with nuclear weapons in the morning, but too bad. Tune in at 6 a.m.
Yeah, and they signed off with the jets flying over and the flags
Yes,
flying.
they did.
It was
Yeah,
just like,
national anthem, and that's it. And I sat there looking at
there was no way to have radio. You could do, but there wasn't even radio.
Wasn't anything.
You had to have a clear channel.
Well, and there wasn't anybody talking. I mean, there was no organized news. If there was no, it's so different in era. I mean, I think now when one of the challenges that I'll be posing to my students tomorrow is what would happen to MLK? I have a 14-page single-spaced letter. That's what Birmingham the letter from Birmingham jail. How do you reduce that to a 140-character tweet? I mean, I'm not sure some of those subtle arguments can be handled in that format. So what would happen to him? My fear is he would have been discredited as a result of his private life, as so many other
Right.
leaders have been, because they would use that to smear him. And it would have been far more effective than it was in that era when you marginalized the people that talked about that kind of thing. Yeah, very interesting. So do you know of any bills in the hopper we should be specifically concerned about, or is it there a lull right now?
Right now, the only bills that have been introduced, not to inspire anybody out there, to hurt us are the bills related to medical services. So we do have a bill that we're watching and fighting with Planned Parenthood that would allow discrimination in medical services based on the strongly held religious belief or moral conviction. So they call it the conscientious objector bill.
Keep us apprised of that, because I think people aren't aware of how much legislation is still in the hopper ready to go through, just because of the last election and the talk about how the party needs to change the Republican Party. It's not clear that that's really happening at the grassroots state level.
We don't take cues from national lessons very well in
Yes,
Michigan, I
no,
don't
we
think.
don't.
So we're ready for anything. We certainly have the messaging all set up because they like to introduce the same things over and over again. So we have refined our battle.
Why is it that the left isn't quite as relentless? I mean, we just seem to be, well, we're fairly agreeable. We'll take a look at your issues and ours and try to come up. And meanwhile, they're back there plotting, and it's just going to be chip, 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 chip.
I think that, and maybe this is cliche to say at this point, I remember hearing an episode of This American Life. It was called This Party Sucks. And one of the parts of the episode was talking about the different messaging strategies
Yes.
of the Democratic and Republican Party, and they had a Republican on, and they talked about, well, we have a briefing every morning, and we hand out this messaging, and we tell people no matter what your interview is, you say these words, you use these phrases, you refer back to this, and so regardless of what channel you're on, you're going to hear something that will be supporting somebody else's argument. And Democrats, they're very much in their personality profiles, wanting to be independent thinkers, feeling like they can do things on their own, whereas Republicans tend to respect authority better.
Absolutely.
And they talked to a political strategist for the Democrats, and they said, well, don't you get a messaging memo every morning? And he said, yes, and Democrats should use that. And they said, well, do you use it? And he said, no, I can do it fine myself.
Right, exactly. Drew Weston wrote a beautiful book called The Political Brain, and there's a lot more research being done about the authoritarian brain versus the people who appreciate ambiguity more. And the minute you get the talking points, you decide, oh, we'd really rather talk about this.
Yeah.
And it's a huge difference in mindset. And that's
And I absolutely believe in the power of messaging, and I try really hard to keep people on track and to make sure that we're all saying the same things. And I think that's one of the more delightful parts of lobbying.
Yes.
is getting that argument down, and it takes a lot of work, and you encounter a lot of resistance even when you're all on the same page and on the same side.
And it takes a lot of discipline from yourself.
Yes.
It does.
Because it's easy to go off track.
But the left doesn't appreciate that kind of consistent messaging
No,
as much as
not
the
at
right
all.
does. The right will take that as marching orders to the day.
Malcolm X would have been good at it.
Yeah, he would have been. He was a pretty authoritarian character.
He had his message down.
Yeah.
He said it often.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining us.
Thank
and
you.
I want to thank Roman. Roman, any parting shots on your way out of the state here?
Not really. I mean, just get involved. You can, of course, follow the Move to Amend campaign at movetoamend.org, and Move to Amend on Facebook. And if you want to keep up to date on what I'm doing, then you'll just have to follow the Move to Amend campaign.
We all need to get on Roman's good side before he takes over the world.
I know. There are these people like Roman, and I say we will all end up working for him one day, so we better get to know him and be nice to him now. So we wish you well, Roman. Congratulations, and you've been. This is the next stage in an important journey, and we can't wait to see what you end up doing.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you very much, Emily.
Thank
and Roman.
you.
See you again, Emily. I want to talk to you more about Black Power too. That's something I
Absolutely,
I
I
didn't
would
study
love
it
to.
formally, but
And
certainly
pretty much
studied it.
pretty soon here we'll be debuting our campaign to repeal the constitutional amendment against marriage equality. So when that happens, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Absolutely,
Great.
absolutely. We're now joined by Valerie Margam of the Historical Society of Greater Lansing, which I always keep getting wrong, so I finally got it right once and for all
Nicely
here.
done.
Yes,
You
yes.
better than I do.
He's only the vice president.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. What is new, Valerie?
Well, this Thursday, we are going to be having a walking tour at the Michigan School for the Blind campus. As a lot of people have heard, some of the buildings on the campus, some of the old dorms, are going to be coming down starting in May. And so we want to take this last chance to tour the school grounds and talk a little bit about why the school was there and what the different buildings were used for and how it impacted the Lansing community.
Interesting. Is that a good news school? Was it a bad news school? What were the good things and the bad things about the school?
Well, it depends
For the
on
blind.
who you ask
Yeah.
and what your philosophy of education was.
Yeah.
I've had a chance to interview some people who attended it as students. I've had a chance to talk to some people who had family that worked there as employees, who knew some of the students, and a lot of people have very positive memories about it. Of course, anytime you have a boarding school situation that's targeted towards one specific group, it's always going to be controversial. And schools for the blind are still controversial today. Some states have them, some states do not. Michigan
still around?
closed ours. They are. In fact, Ohio still has a state school for
I
the
know
blind in
that.
Columbus.
I thought they were all gone. Oh.
They're not. It's about half and half across the country, actually. Michigan's actually started as part of the School for the Deaf in Flint back in the 1850s. And the students, of course, needed different services. There are terrible stories about the pranks the kids would play on one another based on their disabilities. And so eventually they decided to split the School for the Blind off. And it moved to Lansing in 1879. Now, the original building that was there had already been constructed as the Michigan Female College, actually, back in the 1850s. And once MSU and U of M started admitting women, then the school closed. And it was very briefly owned by the Oddfellows, who had the Oddfellows Institute there. But then it was purchased by the state for the School for the Blind. And it functioned from 1879 until 1995 or 1996, depending on who you ask. It was the school changed a lot over the time. It started off just as one building, and everything, classrooms, dorms, faculty housing, was all in together. And it grew over the years to encompass a campus of about 40 acres, actually, and about a dozen buildings. And it serviced students from a wide range of disabilities. Some students were completely blind. Some of them were blind and deaf. Some were what we would today call visually impaired. And at one point, the school had an enrollment of over 200 kids, actually, ranging from 3 to 4 years old up to early 20s. And if you talk to people, a lot of people, particularly those who grew up in North Lansing, have memories of the School for the Blind. Seeing the students out around town, they were encouraged to go off campus and to be as independent as possible. I was talking to a woman the other day who is now 92, who was telling me that she remembered a blind student coming and playing the violin at her church on Sundays occasionally. And that was something Schools for the Blind really supported, was a strong music education. They had a marching band. They had an orchestra for years.
Are just right there.
But it's amazing what they taught the kids to do. For a lot of the students early on, it was the first time they had been with other visually impaired students. You know, say what you will about separating the community out. When it was created, I think it was definitely a good thing, because a lot of these kids came from small farm towns where they might be the only blind person ever. And their parents had no idea what to offer them generally in terms of education. And the local schools couldn't do a lot. I've been reading a book, actually, called The Wonder Years, that is written by Ted Hull, who was actually a tutor from the School for the Blind, who traveled with Stevie Wonder for years. And that's something that Ted talked about, was even for Stevie Wonder, who had been all over the world and had done all these amazing things, he found a sort of camaraderie at the School for the Blind that he never experienced before in his life, because he was suddenly around other people who were like him. And he felt much more comfortable than he ever had before.
It is difficult, though, in those residential schools. We worry about removing kids, from their homes and taking them away, and that idea. There were no scandals involved at the school for the blind, were there?
Not that I'm aware of. Now, the students were there originally full-time as a boarding school. As the school started to shrink in the 1980s and 1990s, most of the students were sent home on the weekends. Though certainly if you're from the Upper Peninsula, that was not an option regardless. They worked very hard, though, to create local families for them. For example, there was a foster grandparent program where different families around the city would be matched up with students, and they would go in and share birthday dinners with them. They would do social events. One gentleman I talked to who was one of the last high school graduates from the School for the Blind talked about how his foster grandmother would bring in one of her biological granddaughters, and they loved to play cards. They had Braille cards that they would play with, and he said that this little girl loved to beat him in Uno. So they worked very hard to try to create as much of a family sense as they could. That also changed in how they housed students over the years. Initially, the students were all in the one main building in a dorm setting, but in the early 1960s, they actually built the residences that are there today, which are going to be torn down, which are more of sort of a cottage philosophy, where the students would be grouped in groups of 15 to 20 students, and they would all sort of live in this house together.
Boys
so
and
they would
girls?
have boys in some areas, girls in other areas. They were also segregated somewhat by age. So you would have high school students together and younger students. And this allowed them to have family-style dinners together where they could, learn dinner etiquette and so on. And that's something that a lot of students benefited from, was by being in this environment, they had help with every aspect of their lives.
Yeah.
I talked to a woman from the Department of Education who mentioned the fact that, something most of us take for granted is how to eat, where the food is on the plate.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about giving actual lessons as to how to butter a slice of bread. And there were two ways you could teach it. You could either teach it in 4 stripes across the bread, or you could teach it 4 corners, going from one corner to the next, and around.
Interesting.
Something that most of us don't really think about.
Yeah.
I worked with in the Department of Labor, where the Commission for Blind was, so we had a lot of crossover with the School for the Blind, and it was a fascinating lifestyle. It was very interesting, and I don't think I ever talked to a student there that did not like what was going on.
Yeah. I at the Great Lakes Folk Festival a number of years ago, the Blind Boys of Alabama were there performing, and the lead singer was talking about the school that they all went to. That's how they met each other, and that's how they became the singing group that they were. And he said that their choice was to do that and use music, or that they were taught how to make brooms and how to take straws and fashion them together to make brooms. And when your choice is making brooms for the rest of your life, or being able to do music, you can see where music would have a much bigger appeal.
Broom making, chair caning.
So, yeah.
Today, a lot of blind students are often encouraged to go into massage work.
Yeah.
And piano tuners was the other traditional career for
Well, I
blind
wonder
students.
from your perspective, I don't know, it wouldn't necessarily be part of the purview of the work you did looking at the past, but do we do as good a job today of taking care of the kids as we did then?
It's interesting because some of the students I talked to who attended the school are actually disappointed in the lack of educational opportunities that are afforded students in Michigan today, because they're simply left at the mercy of their particular instructor who comes to their school, and generally they're not with that instructor all the time. So they're spending some time in a regular class where their needs are only partially being met, and their instructor might be there to check in a couple times a week, but they're also servicing other students. So you don't have that one-on-one attention. A lot of the classes were small, 5, 6 kids, and so it meant you got a lot of individual attention along the way. It also brought great resources to them. One guy I talked to said that his favorite part was the library. He never had access to books on record, books on tape, Braille books, which are huge. One textbook can be like 10 volumes in Braille. And he said, it opened an entirely new world to me because I had never seen a Braille book before.
Yeah. I love the anecdotal stories and Valerie is just marvelous for this, and the tour that she gives this weekend I think is going to be wonderful.
One she didn't bring up is when you say School for the Blind, there's one thing everybody thinks of.
Stevie Wonder.
Yes.
Of course, yeah.
And Stevie Wonder actually didn't go there for very long because he had this private tutor. He traveled around, but he went, and he was part of the orchestra, part of the band like any other kid. He did not want to stand out there. He just wanted to be one of the gang.
Yeah,
and
he'd stand out almost anywhere.
Oh, they would. They got into trouble. I mean, there's a story about a still some boys built in the attic of one of the buildings at one point. They would, of course, try to sneak out at night. Apparently, one of the superintendents caught on to this particular group of boys who was doing this at one point and actually slept in one of their beds. So when they came back at 3 o'clock in the morning, look who's here. So, they got into trouble and pulled pranks like anybody else.
What will the tour entail?
We are going to meet at the Neighborhood Empowerment Center, which is on Walnut, just at the corner of Walnut and Pine.
Yeah.
Then along
What
with
time
Pine
will it
Apparel.
be?
No, no.
6:00
Pine.
p.m. It's on Pine Street, sorry. Right next to Rizzi Design.
Okay.
Rizzi Design is in the old superintendent's home, so we're going to see that. We're going to go in the Neighborhood Empowerment Center.
That's Saturday or Sunday?
This is Thursday.
Oh,
Thursday
Thursday.
evening, 6
Okay.
p.m.
All right.
Tours free, open to the public. We're going to be walking around the campus, talking about some of the different buildings, the history behind them, how they were used. And we're also going to be talking a lot about what a student experience was like. They had a wrestling team. They put on class plays. They had cheerleading for girls. They had track meets. You know, they really had a pretty rich high school environment. And we're going to talk about how that was possible. Also, how the community benefited. There were a lot of people in Lansing who had jobs at the School for the Blind over the years. Some of them specialized teachers, but a lot of them were secretaries. There was a school nurse. There were maintenance people. There were security guards. So it was a big employer as well, and a big part of what happened in North Lansing.
One of the challenges for gathering information about the School for the Blind is that they might be the least likely to maintain a visual record of photographs.
You would be amazed. They had a school yearbook
They
at one point
did?
in time. Mm-hmm.
Was it in Braille with the names?
No.
Mm.
You have to remember, a lot of the students who went were not completely
Okay.
blind. They were
All right.
visually impaired.
You could be legally blind and still have some sense.
Mhm.
So that was How many students we went through there altogether? Do we have any idea?
Thousands over the years.
Oh, really?
The peak population I've seen was in the late 1960s and early 70s. Part of that's the baby boom. Part of it was the linamide babies. Part of it was the rubella epidemic that went through. And they had over 200 students on campus just at one time. So imagine from 1879 to 1996, you have thousands who are graduating.
I remember hearing stories about the people in the community that you'd see people with white canes and but a lot of that teaching the social parts of life, I'm not sure we do that well for any of our students, whether they're blind or not. Seriously.
Mhm.
I mean, just learning etiquette,
Yes.
learning all of those little kinds of details. They make a difference in how well you fit in.
And they were taught life skills that we ignore
Yeah.
today as well. You know, how to cook for yourself, how to run a home, personal appearance, taking care of yourself. They're
How
lessons
do
a
you
lot of us
shop
could
when you
benefit
can't
from.
check prices
Mhm.
and all those kinds of
How to make
things.
change, how to
make
handle
change.
money.
Yes, absolutely.
And now a lot of the devices that you can buy take care of some of that,
Mm-hmm.
the technical devices.
There used to be a tradition too, where the newspaper, magazine, and candy shop in the public facilities were run by people who were
Mhm.
part of the blind.
The
Still
Commission
is.
for the
It
Blind
is?
still has
Mhm.
those contracts through the state.
Oh, I
The
didn't
state,
realize that.
right.
Where I haven't seen one in years. Where are they?
In the state buildings
Oh,
and federal buildings.
oh, interesting.
Next time
So
you're in the
that's-
Capitol.
I guess I missed them. I was going to say about your stories, I have to tell you something, Valerie. I was thinking about this the other day. You prompted me when the last time you were here. I remember thinking how much, when I was 15 years old, I lived in upstate New York, and my teacher that year who taught world history was a woman named Bertha Buell. And she told this fabulous story that changed my life. She talked about how Genghis Khan and his ravaging hordes they would be zipping along the steppes on their horses, and they wouldn't take time to eat. They would snatch up an animal, right, on the run as they were there. Who knows what kind of little galloping animal they would have. They would stuff it under their saddle to warm it up because they couldn't stop to cook. And then they would just rip off a piece and eat it. And that was such a vivid story that I thought to myself, that is just fantastic. I mean, I was so delighted with Bertha. So the other night I'm thinking about this and the beauty of the internet. I found Bertha Buell, and she's 91 years old, and she lives in New York, not far from where she taught at that point. So I wrote Bertha a letter last week and mailed it to her and told her how I had remembered that story since I was 15, and that I always thought she was, such an exceptional teacher that I've always viewed her as an inspiration, because I think those are the stories. That's the difference. You can take somebody to a facility, you can give them the stats, but it's the stories about buttering the bread that everybody will remember. Those are the kinds of intimate, personal details that bring history.
And that's how history, I think, should be told.
I do too.
That's really
It has to be.
It shouldn't be told through the eyes of old white men. Who said that? I did, an old white man, so I can say it. No, I mean, we've got a skewed view of history.
We certainly do. We certainly do. And I think we're going to have to make sure that, so it's going to be Thursday night.
Thursday night, 6 p.m. Meet at
6
Rizzi Design or the Neighborhood Empowerment Center. It's right there on Pine Street.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful evening this evening with Roman Collins and Emily Devendorf and Valerie Marvin. We've had a full show here this evening, and we look forward to seeing everybody next Monday night, where we will have a new crew of people in. This is Lansing Online News Radio, and you will see us every Monday night at 7 p.m. with Bonnie and Bill. Thank you very much.
It's Willow, not Walnut. Oops.
think anybody who's lived in this town long
Knows where
enough
it is.
knows where
Yeah.
it is. They won't even bother looking it up on MapQuest.
I always feel so bad for the people who ask me for directions at work. It's like, really, you don't want my directions?